The White House briefing room was abuzz with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest and most dynamic White House press secretary in recent memory, had built a reputation for her sharp wit, unshakable confidence, and mastery of political combat. Her latest challenge? A growing feud with Whoopi Goldberg, the outspoken co-host of The View, who had never been shy about her disdain for the Trump administration. For weeks, Whoopi had taken jabs at Karoline on live television, calling her just another Trump puppet and questioning her credibility. But the real firestorm erupted when Whoopi, in a fiery monologue, accused the administration of suppressing free speech while silencing opposing voices. "This is not democracy," she had declared. "This is authoritarianism, and Karoline Leavitt is just the mouthpiece for it." The media had eaten it up, running headline after headline, fueling the fire of controversy. The pressure was on. But if there was one thing everyone in Washington knew about Karoline Leavitt, it was that she didn't back down from a fight. She relished it. Now, as she took her place at the podium for the daily briefing, the room fell silent. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, reporters eager to see how she would respond. Clad in a sharp navy blue suit, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, Karoline exuded a calm, collected power. She adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and then, with a piercing gaze, began to speak. "Before we take questions, I'd like to address some recent commentary made by a certain talk show host who seems to believe she speaks for all Americans." Her voice was smooth, unshaken, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it. The room stirred. They all knew who she meant. Karoline continued, "Ms. Goldberg has accused this administration of suppressing free speech, of engaging in authoritarianism, and most absurdly, of silencing the opposition. This coming from a woman who sits at a table every day where dissenting voices are cut off, mocked, and, let's not forget, literally kicked off the show when they don't align with her views." A few reporters exchanged glances, some smirking while others hurriedly typed down her words. Karoline wasn't pulling any punches. "She speaks of democracy," Karoline went on, "but let's talk about what democracy actually looks like. It looks like voters choosing their leaders, not media elites dictating who is allowed to have an opinion. It looks like Americans making their own decisions, not being bullied into submission by Hollywood talking heads." The room was electric. This wasn't just a response, this was an outright dismantling. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked onto the cameras. "Ms. Goldberg, if you truly believe in free speech, then let's test it. I invite you to the White House anytime for an open debate, live and unfiltered, where we can discuss these issues without the selective editing and audience cues that make you feel invincible. The American people deserve honesty, not theatrics." The challenge was set. The reporters erupted into questions, but Karoline simply smiled. "Now, who has the first question?" The clip of her response spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media was ablaze. Conservative commentators hailed her as a warrior for free speech, while Whoopi's supporters scrambled to defend her. The pressure was mounting on The View to respond. The real battle had only just begun. The morning after Karoline Leavitt's blistering press conference, the air at The View's studio was thick with tension. The segment was set. Whoopi Goldberg, flanked by her co-hosts, sipped her coffee with an unmistakable air of irritation. The producers had already prepped the audience, and the energy in the studio crackled with anticipation. As the intro music played and the cameras rolled, Whoopi wasted no time. Well, she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like the White House press secretary wants to have a little debate. How cute." The audience chuckled on cue, but there was no mistaking the irritation behind her words. "I mean, let's be real here," she continued, shaking her head. "Karoline Leavitt wants to talk about democracy? Sweetie, you work for Donald Trump. That's like a fish talking about how to climb trees." The audience erupted into laughter. Joy Behar grinned, jumping in, "It's classic Trump playbook, pretend like you're the victim when you're the one doing the damage." But as the segment continued, something strange started happening. The energy in the studio shifted. Instead of unanimous cheers, some audience members exchanged looks. The online reaction was mixed. The night before, Karoline's response had struck a nerve, not just with conservatives but with moderates who were tired of Hollywood elites dictating the rules of political discourse. And then came the biggest shock of all. As Whoopi continued her monologue, a producer rushed onto the set, handing her a note. She frowned, adjusted her glasses, and read it. Her expression darkened. She looked up at the cameras and forced a smirk. "Well, folks, looks like Ms. Leavitt didn't just stop at a press briefing. She sent a formal invitation. The White House has officially reached out to invite me for a live, unedited debate. A collective gasp rippled through the studio audience. Even Joy Behar blinked in surprise. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her voice cautious. "And are we considering it?" Whoopi hesitated. She hadn't expected Karoline to double down like this. It was one thing to mock the press secretary on daytime television, but debating her in a live, unfiltered format? That was a different battlefield. But Whoopi Goldberg wasn't one to back down either. With a deep breath, she turned back to the camera, her jaw tightening. "You know what? Let's do it." The audience erupted in applause, but the tension on set was undeniable. The battle lines had been drawn. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Whoopi versus Karoline, the Showdown America needs trended on Twitter. News networks scrambled to cover the story. Every major political pundit weighed in. At the White House, Karoline Leavitt sat in her office watching the broadcast with a satisfied smile. She had anticipated Whoopi's response perfectly. A debate wasn't just an opportunity to counter Whoopi's talking points, it was a strategic masterstroke. Whoopi had built her career on controlled environments, pre-scripted lines, and friendly audiences. But Karoline? She thrived in high-pressure, unscripted settings. As she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed. A message from the White House communications team. "Debate set for next Thursday. Primetime. Nationwide broadcast. Let's make history." The night of the debate arrived like a thunderstorm over Washington, D.C. Every major news network had cleared their schedules for the unprecedented event. Two women, one from Hollywood, one from the White House, were about to go head-to-head in front of millions of Americans. The venue? A grand auditorium in New York City, packed with journalists, politicians, and high-profile guests from both sides of the political spectrum. The debate was moderated by Bret Baier from Fox News and George Stephanopoulos from ABC. A deliberate move to ensure neither side could claim media bias. Backstage, Karoline Leavitt sat in her dressing room, calmly reviewing her notes. She was dressed in a sleek black blazer and white blouse, her hair in a tight bun, exuding an air of sharp professionalism. Her team had prepped her well, but she hardly needed it. This was her battlefield. Down the hall, Whoopi Goldberg paced, dressed in her signature loose-fit black attire and glasses. Her face was unreadable, but inside, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't the View where she controlled the dialogue. This was neutral ground, and Karoline had already proven she wasn't going to be an easy opponent. As the cameras went live, the audience hushed. The moderators gave their introductions, and finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bret Baier announced, "let's begin." The first question was broad but direct. "Does the Trump administration suppress free speech?" Whoopi smirked and leaned forward. "Look, I've been in this industry a long time," she said, "and what I see happening right now is terrifying. When you have an administration that attacks the press, discredits journalists, and pushes their own narrative while dismissing opposing voices, that's suppression. That's not democracy." The audience cheered. Whoopi nodded confidently. This was her arena. But then Karoline Leavitt spoke. "With all due respect, Whoopi," she said, her tone even and composed, "you work on a talk show where you have literally silenced conservative co-hosts, mocked people who disagree with you, and created an environment where opposing opinions aren't just debated, they're ridiculed." The audience murmured. Karoline continued, "You talk about suppression? Let's talk about The View ejecting Meghan McCain for being too difficult, because she dared to have a different perspective. Let's talk about liberal media outlets who refuse to platform conservative voices. Let's talk about big tech companies that shadow ban conservatives under the guise of misinformation." She paused, letting the moment sink in. "Free speech doesn't mean only your speech is protected, Whoopi. It means all speech is protected, even the voices you don't like." The crowd stirred. Even Whoopi looked momentarily thrown off. George Stephanopoulos quickly shifted the conversation. "Ms. Goldberg, do you believe conservative voices are being censored?" Whoopi regained her footing. "I believe there's a difference between censorship and accountability," she shot back. "When someone spreads lies, like election conspiracies or dangerous rhetoric, platforms have a responsibility to fact-check and, yes, sometimes remove harmful content." Karoline pounced. "So who gets to decide what's dangerous? You? Hollywood? Tech billionaires?" She leaned forward, eyes locked onto Whoopi. The founding fathers didn't say you can have free speech unless Whoopi Goldberg thinks it's misinformation. The crowd erupted in applause. Whoopi opened her mouth, then shut it. She had walked into Karoline's trap. The night was far from over. But for the first time, Whoopi Goldberg realized she wasn't in control of this conversation. The debate pressed on, and Whoopi Goldberg was struggling to keep her footing. What started as a confident, fiery defense of her views had turned into a desperate scramble to counter Karoline Leavitt's razor-sharp rebuttals. The next topic, media bias and political narratives. Bret Baier turned to Karoline first. Ms. Leavitt, do you believe mainstream media unfairly targets conservatives? Karoline nodded. Absolutely. And it's not just conservatives who see it, it's the American people. Whoopi, you and your colleagues in entertainment and mainstream media love to claim you're just telling the truth. But what you're really doing is shaping a narrative that benefits your side. You selectively report stories, silence dissenting voices, and push a one-sided view while calling it news. Whoopi scoffed. That's ridiculous. Media reports facts. Karoline's eyes flashed. Really? Let's test that. She pulled out a small stack of note cards. Here's a fact. The Hunter Biden laptop story suppressed for 2 years, called Russian disinformation by major outlets only for them to later admit it was true. That was a politically motivated lie. Whoopi shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. Karoline held up another card. Here's another fact. During the 2020 election, every mainstream outlet amplified false claims that Trump colluded with Russia, a claim later debunked. But when that truth came out, did anyone apologize? No. They just moved on to the next manufactured outrage. The audience murmured. Even some of Whoopi's most loyal fans in the crowd were starting to fidget. Karoline leaned forward. Here's the real difference between us, Whoopi. When conservative media gets something wrong, the left demands accountability. But when liberal media gets something wrong, they just rewrite history and pretend it never happened. Whoopi exhaled sharply. So what, you're saying Fox News is the only trustworthy network? Karoline smiled. Not at all. I'm saying that Americans are smart enough to know when they're being manipulated. And they're tired of people like you pretending to be neutral when you're really just pushing a political agenda. The applause was deafening. Whoopi's frustration boiled over. You know what, Karoline, she snapped. You act like you're some defender of truth, but you're just another Trump loyalist trying to spin reality. You work for a man who lies daily. Karoline didn't flinch. Whoopi, Donald Trump is not the topic of this debate. You are. And right now, you're proving my point. When you can't win an argument, you resort to name-calling and distractions. Whoopi's face twisted in frustration. I'm done with this. She threw off her microphone, stood up, and stormed off the stage. The audience gasped. The moderators hesitated, unsure of what to do. Karoline simply sat back in her chair, a small, knowing smile on her lips. After a few moments, Bret Baier turned to the camera. Well, that was unexpected. Karoline folded her hands on the table. Not really. Whoopi is used to controlling the conversation. When she loses control, she walks away. That's not strength, that's weakness. The audience erupted into cheers. Whoopi Goldberg, the media powerhouse, had just been publicly dismantled. And Karoline Leavitt had made history. The moment Whoopi Goldberg stormed off stage, the internet exploded. Clips of the debate flooded social media with hashtags like #WhoopiWalksAway, #Karoline and #ViewExposed trending within minutes. Conservative commentators hailed Karoline Leavitt's performance as a masterclass in debating, while even some moderates admitted that Whoopi had been completely outmatched. Backstage, Whoopi was fuming. I'm not doing this, she barked at her producers. I'm not going back out there to entertain her nonsense. Her co-host Joy Behar rushed over, her face flushed with panic. Whoopi, you can't just leave. They're already saying you lost. I don't care, Whoopi snapped. That little girl is just a mouthpiece for Trump. I refuse to let her use me for her agenda. But deep down, Whoopi knew the truth: she had lost. Meanwhile, in the White House, Karoline Leavitt watched the footage on a large screen in the West Wing, sipping her coffee as President Donald Trump's team celebrated. Senior aides clapped and exchanged high fives, thrilled by how the night had played out. President Trump himself had been watching from Mar-a-Lago, and within minutes, he posted on Truth Social. Karoline Leavitt destroyed Whoopi Goldberg. The fake news media won't know what to do with this. Best press secretary ever. United States. Karoline chuckled. Mission accomplished. But the real impact of the debate would be felt in the coming days. The media scramble. The next morning, the mainstream media went into damage control mode. CNN and MSNBC ran segments trying to reframe the debate. Whoopi Goldberg took a stand against disinformation, one anchor claimed. She refused to engage in a bad faith argument with an administration built on lies. But the problem? The clips told a different story. Millions had watched Whoopi flounder, struggle, and finally walk away, not in protest, but in defeat. The conservative media had a field day. Fox News ran a special segment titled, "The View Exposed: How Karoline Leavitt Humiliated Hollywood's Elite." Talk radio hosts played clips of Karoline's takedown on repeat, celebrating the moment as a cultural turning point. The View's desperate damage control. By Monday morning, ABC was scrambling to save The View's reputation. Whoopi Goldberg refused to return to the show for 2 days, forcing Joy Behar to lead an awkward discussion about the debate. Look, Joy sighed, trying to control the narrative. Whoopi didn't walk away because she lost. She walked away because it wasn't worth engaging in a bad faith argument. But the audience wasn't buying it. Online comments flooded the broadcast. Fire, she ran away because she had no answers. Fire, Karoline embarrassed her and now they're trying to spin it. Fire, if Whoopi was right, she would have stayed and fought. It was a PR disaster for The View. And then came the worst news of all. The ratings crash. By the end of the week, the ratings report came in. The View had lost nearly 500,000 viewers since the debate. Many of them were moderates and independents who had finally seen through the show's one-sided political agenda. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's name was everywhere. Fire conservative podcasts wanted her as a guest. Fire news outlets praised her composure and intelligence. Fire even liberal analysts had to admit Whoopi had been outclassed. The final blow. A week after the debate, Karoline appeared on Tucker Carlson's new show where she delivered the final nail in the coffin. Whoopi Goldberg and the Hollywood elite think they control the narrative, she said, looking straight into the camera. But America is waking up. They don't want their opinions dictated by celebrities who live in gated mansions and mock everyday Americans. They want truth. They want real debate. And last week, they saw what happens when Hollywood's fake intellectuals finally get challenged. Boom. The clip went viral again, solidifying Karoline's status as a conservative powerhouse. As for Whoopi, she never mentioned Karoline Leavitt's name again. Because she knew Karoline had won.